Let's give God another hand praise today because as our worship leader, Reverend Freeman, shared, that's the purpose of our being here. I want to attempt to address a passage of scripture that I've labored with back and forth, even discussed it with a couple of members here, trying to get some full, clear view and understanding of it. I'd like for you to turn with me today to the book of Ecclesiastes, the book that was penned by one of the wisest men considered to have lived, Solomon. The book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 11, I want to address 6 verses of this text. Ecclesiastes chapter 11, beginning at verse 1, it says, "Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth, and if the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. As thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou knowest not the work of God, who maketh all. In the morning sow thy seed, excuse me, and in the evening withhold not thy hand, for thou knowest not whether shall prosper either this or that, or whether they both shall be good." Thank you so much. A mystery text that has been brought before us from childhood. I've heard it in my household, in my days of growing up. Cast your bread upon the waters. Today I want to talk about getting the most out of life. It's a stewardship sermon message that I like to share, and I hope that I be clear, crisp, and concise. Pray with me, because this book, like the book of Proverbs, shares with us that each verse stands alone. But today, if God would permit me, I would like to try to use these 6 verses as a cluster of information that would give each of us advice on getting the most out of life. Ecclesiastes, like much of life, represents a journey that starts with one point and ends with another. Ultimately, the great truth of Ecclesiastes lies in the acknowledgement of God's ever-present hand on our life. It's about trusting God. It's about believing in God. It's about putting our lives in the hands of God. I was reading a book, thank you. on Professor James E. Smith in his book on Old Testament survey. And this is what he said: when living under duress, one had better take heed of this advice. Listen. Warren Wiersbe, in one of his books, the noted, most famous, celebrated author, talks about this text as life is an adventure. That's what Dr. Wiersbe says. He says that life is an exciting, unusual experience. And when we look at that, my brothers and sisters, he shares by punctuating his statement by saying we must live it by faith. This text today continually calls upon every individual in God's creation, both religious and secular, listen, to act with faith, that the benefit of their faith will not be lost. Trust God. Believe in God. Lean to God. In the words of wisdom on how to get the most out of life, there are warnings. Listen, warnings here against an excess of caution. Listen, the writer here argues the positive. He concludes that life is worth living if you put God first. Dr. Cecil Sherman, and I promise you, everything I'm talking today is borrowed by some famous, celebrated author that I may not be criticized for plagiarism. It's an idea that Dr. Cecil Sherman, who was introduced to me by my dear friend, Reverend Dr. Timothy Glenn. As I spoke with Dr. Glenn, he shared with me this book on Cecil Sherman, great noted author. And Dr. Sherman suggests, listen, that the passage is open to several meanings. One interpretation, several applications, including wisdom for the future and wisdom for the present. Look, where do you get wisdom? Kmart, Walmart, some super center, Amazon? No. Wisdom comes from God. Please note it. Please note it. And Dr. Sherman says, if you want to get the most out of life, apply your life to wisdom and apply wisdom to your life. He breaks this text down in several points. He says in verses 1 and 2, Dr. Sherman says, first of all, suggests, when he read the text, that you should divide your mean in several ways, for you don't know what disaster may come. Then he says in verse 3, he says, observe and trust God regardless of the order of nature. Rain, shine, snow, or sleep. Listen, don't hang up on me. Then he shares with us, verse 4, beware of over caution. Because over caution will paralyze you. Then he tiptoes on to verse 5. We don't know everything. I mean, some folks think they do. But we don't know everything. We don't understand how breath comes to the bones of a child in his mother's womb. We don't know the work of God, who makes everything. And if we wait, now this is what got me. If we wait until we understand all, we won't touch much. I mean, as the commercial said, own it. And the idea is, he closes by saying in verse 6, work hard and watch things work for you. Don't let our hands, I told you a few weeks ago I was coming here. Don't let your hands become idle. Then I looked on the shelf, and the noted preacher, one of the most celebrated preachers here in rural West Tennessee, right a few miles from us, he's dead in his grave now, resting, celebrated pastor before he passed, the Reverend Dr. Adrian Rogers. Oh, you've heard him, Bellevue Baptist Church. I want you to know that Dr. Rogers says, can I place my scattered opinions on the text? I said, Dr. Rogers, most certainly. That's why I put you on my shelf. He says, now Solomon, who wrote this, knew very much about investing and how he invested was this: he cast his bread on the water. I said, okay, you mean to tell me he got a loaf of bread and started throwing it on the water? Because when I was a child and I heard it, that's what I thought. How are you going to catch bread and then go back and get it? Dr. Rogers says, no, Solomon was a trader. He was an investor. And he invested his money in ships. And he would set ships out to sail. And they would sail goods. And in 7 days later, they would return with much return. I said, man, that's good. He said, and that's what you got to understand, is that when you look at this idea of casting your bread upon the water, you must apply your life to wisdom and apply your life to principles. Listen. Give a portion to 7. Because that's what got me. You mean tell me I'm going to make the money and then give it away? He said, Reverend, would you just be quiet and read? Give to 7 and even to 8. And for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. I think that's verse 2. He says, what you got to do, you got to take share in several adventures. You don't know what's going to go wrong in the world. So he says, as Big Mama said when I was a little boy, don't put all your eggs. Evidently, she knew Rogers before I did. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Open yourself up to new ideas. Open yourself up to new opportunities. Don't be afraid to step out. And a whole lot of folk is afraid to get out on the limb, but you don't realize that's where the fruit is. Then I said, okay, I got it. He said, move on. Keep reading. Page after page, leaf after leaf, it'll come to you. He says, look, if you will, in the 3rd verse, and he says, if the clouds, that's the Bible, be full of rain and they empty themselves, it's going to rain. Yeah, that's why it rained. The clouds become full. And if the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree falls toward the south or toward the north, wherever it falls, that's where it shall be. Listen, what in the world is the text saying? One commentary says, sooner or later, this is what the Bible, this is what Solomon is saying, sooner or later, and my great mama told me, son, always remember sooner or later. And I said, yes, ma'am. I said, now what I need to remember? She said, remember, sooner always show up before later. And I said, God Almighty. It's the idea. He says sooner or later, Solomon says the wind gonna blow. Sooner or later, storms are gonna come. And when it blows over the tree, the way the tree falls, that's where it's gonna stay. What he's saying here, one writer says, get ready for the foreseen, but also get ready for the unforeseen. I got 2 amens, 1 clap, and somebody said, mm-hmm. Get ready for the foreseen, but also get ready for the unforeseen. I declare I'm preaching today. Look, what he says, the Bible, Solomon says, well, I tell you what, since you think my statement don't have no credibility, since you're so intelligent, since you're supposed to be made in the image of God, since you're so wise, consider the ant. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 11. Can I read it to you? He said, go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, no overseer, no foreman, no team leader, no supervisor, provideth her meat, that is, her food, in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. Now, how long wilt thou sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thou want as an armed man. Consider the ant. And I just thought about the days on my back porch. You drop a little crumb of bread. Ant running and racing. One little ant appears to me, I'm exaggerating, got a whole slice of bread. Make it his way. And I caught it, raised it up to see how many was with him. By itself. Getting ready. Here it is, hot as a firecracker. I'm sweating, laid back, cooling it. A little sleep thou slumbered, and the ant is working. What I'm saying today, now I'm going to say that for closing. Work. Here it is. Solomon didn't send us to some psychologist to get advice. He sent us to the ant. Then I thought about what Big Mama said. You ain't got ant. Somebody been talking to Big Mama. Ain't got ant sense. You gonna sit back and wait until it's cold, snowing, tree done fell down, nowhere to go. Now you worried about it because you done laid back sleeping. And slumbering. Let me move on because I got to go somewhere else to tell this story. Idea of it is, he says, consider the ant. He says, because this is how it fits in the cluster. It's because don't forsake venture. He that observeth the wind, verse 4, he that observeth the wind shall not sow. And he that regardeth the cloud shall not reap. You got to learn how to venture. You got to learn how to get out there and get it. God doesn't give you strength. He doesn't give you vigor, vitality, activities of your limb, clothe you in your right mind. Get it while it look at the farmer. He or she, and I got to say he or she is because I used to consider farmers to be men until my wife started watching Farm Her on that farm channel. Y'all know, Ara, FDTB, whoever. He or she is not guaranteed anything. Listen, they put their seed in the ground and they hope and trust God. Trusting that things gonna come out just fine. Now I got my lesson, whether y'all gonna sit on me or not. The idea there may come a flood. But farmer ain't worried about what may come. There may come a drought. He's not worried about whether it's not going to rain. There may come pestilence. He ain't worried about what's going to eat up the crop. If they become a part of the society of wind watchers and cloud examiners, we'll starve to death. I mean, when we go to that supermarket out south, and I got some folk been fussing at me about calling names of different vendors because they said there's advertising. So I'm going to let you go on wherever you go. But when you go in there and you look at them pork chop, and you look at those turnip greens and cabbage, what if they were wind watchers and cloud examiners? All of us be on a diet. This is what it's saying, brothers and sisters, and I'm finna go. There are opportunities. And don't be afraid to take advantage of opportunities. I mean, what if you lived on what if? You'd be skinny as a razor. But he shared with us in verse 5, you got to live with trust. Look, if you will, as thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child. Even so thou knowest not the works of God who maketh everything. Now that's the Bible. What does it says to me? It says that there's some stuff we don't know. How do we know the mind of the Spirit? How do we know how a child grows within his mother's stomach or womb? How do we know how bones come together? Oh, we have an idea. There are scientists and researchers, but nobody can pinpoint because it's a mystery. It's the work of God. And all we can do is, when it happened, we just say, oh, you're so beautiful. Oh, you little precious little thing. I don't know how, which I know some of the brothers are, and she's just like your daddy. I'm going to leave that alone. it's the idea that you got to look at it. It's God. That's one of the greatest miracles of all ages, the precious little baby being born from his mother's womb. What is it saying? I'm done. Give me a couple of minutes. It says, all you can say is trust God. All you can say is, Lord, I put everything in your hand. That's all we can say every day, brothers and sisters. If there ever was a time that we got to learn to trust God, now is the time to trust God. Keep living. Don't die on prediction. Just as sure as we live, we gonna die, but don't die on prediction. You know how some folks in the wintertime, they be sitting in the living room, just half dressed, sitting back cozy, and the weatherman come on and says, it's finna come a blizzard, and they turn the heat up. Yeah, now I'm finna go. I mean, you sitting there, freezer just as fat, pork chop, ham hock, turnip greens, cabinet full. Weatherman come on and says, it's gonna be a tremendous ice storm, and you better get what you can get. You scratching your last dime. I already got a freezer full. Going to the store. The other day, me and my wife drove 35 miles for a roll of toilet tissue. I told her, I ain't going no further. We're going to mess around and run out of gas. Now, y'all laughing, but I passed some of y'all on the way to the dollar store. All on what? Prediction. Let me go. Thank you so much. I'm going. Here's my last point. Trust God for guidance. There comes a time when you just say, Lord, it's in your hand. But look what he said. I'm sorry for this last point. I'm sorry for the last point. I'm sorry for the last point. But read it for yourself. Work. Here it is in verse 6. In the morning, sow thy seed. In the evening, withhold not thy hand, for thou knowest not whether shall prosper, either this or that, or whether they both will prosper alike. Let me tell you what Proverbs says in the 14th chapter, the 23rd verse, before I take my exit. And I want you to trust this. In all labor, there is profit. Ain't no work in vain. All labor, there's a profit. Now, there's something terrible happening in America today. You see it. Whatever it is or whatever has happened has encouraged people not to work. I'm going to say it like the lady said it during devotion. I ain't going to just charge one person. I'm going to charge everybody. What is it that told us we don't have to work? Here's the principle. If you don't work, now y'all done heard my grandmama. You don't work, you don't eat. You gotta get your rusty foot self up out of that bed and find you something to do. Talking about a robot got my job. Well, become the robot. Now see, y'all got mad at me. Listen, I'm done, Brother James. Real soft. I want some funeral music. We are stewards. We are not owners. We are stewards. When God made the earth and put Adam in it, he told Adam, till the ground, be fruitful, have dominion over the earth. Take the risk. Trust me. And this is how we make it in life. We don't just sit back and relax. Don't sit back and sleep and slumber. Consider the end. And before it get cold, y'all ain't never saw it, throw some bread outside. Wait about 15 or 20 minutes and then come back and go to school. Because the ant's going to teach us a lesson. But then trust the Lord. I saw a gentleman, I ain't going to call his name. I saw a gentleman pull up beside him a couple of days ago. And I just messing with him. I said, hey, they told me that you done quit working. He looked at me and laughed and said, God is able, ain't he, boy? He didn't know he was adding to my sermon. God is able. Now listen. This is not a shouting sermon today. This is a sermon of stewardship. A sermon that tells us, trust God. Venture out. Whatever your hands find to do, do it. Because ain't no work in the grave.